Welcome. Today, this ficus you see behind me is getting a drastic trunk chop. But first, let's have a closer look at it, just so you can see what we're working with. So it's pretty tall. And as you can see, when I first got it, it was much bigger. There was a lot more to it. But I trimmed it all back, I gave it an initial repot. And it's grown back since then. I've had it for about 18 months now. But because I've got a new shoot from here, I think it's time. I think it's time to drastically chop the trunk. So that's what I'm going to do. So while I've got you, I'll show you some other ficus material that I've got at the moment. This is a Benjamina. It's variegated. Just waiting, really. It's got some new growth, which is good, considering it had a pretty hard repot a couple of weeks ago. Lots of new growth here, which is great. These are my maples. They're all coming along. The red maples are having a little bit of a leaf issue, but it won't harm them overall. We've got a wisteria here, a lemon tree, which I'm just kind of letting bush up at the moment, and an olive tree. This is not a frangipani, sorry. This is a jacaranda. No, frangipani is upstairs. Here are some more ficus. Now this is the same species as the one that we're about to radically trunk chop today. This one is probably about 20 years old. I got this when I was 14. And it was at my parents' house for about 10 years, and it was about this tall, about as tall as the gate here, but it was very spindly, and I basically hacked it back and just let it regrow, and it's recovered quite well. A lot of vigorous growth, which is good. This is another one I've recently potted up, although a bit prematurely. We're still working on the finer ramification on the top. And it's a little bit two-dimensional. I really need something back here before that would be a tree that I'd be happy to brag about. This is a squamata juniper, or a juniper nana, which I recently potted up. Gave it a little bit of a moss installation. That'll probably die though, it gets a bit too hot here. Some gin features, played around with the Dremel, and some lime sulfur. Overall, pretty good tree. It needs a bit more in the apex here, but I was a little bit impatient and potted it up anyway. Now I have a pretty good idea of which pot I want to use for this bonsai. And it's not the perfect pot, it definitely isn't. But it's more just a pot that I had that was the appropriate size and in effect will be used as a training pot from here on out. And it's this Chinese style unglazed terracotta pot. So I'm going to use this pot. I've marked a little notch in the tree where it needs to be cut. And that's just based on roughly, because the trunk's going to be really thick, and that pot is quite thick as well, I've done it about 1.5 times the width of the pot, because eventually this will grow from here, and you'll end up with, well, if you use this as a branch, I'm thinking more of a broom style at this point, but we'll see what it gives me. So now that we've at least established where we're going to cut this thing, it's time. Now all of these you could propagate into cuttings, but I already have so many of these trees that I'm not going to bother. Okay, so this is what we're left with. And it's just a bit of a fat stump. But that's kind of the point, because this will bush up, and that's what we want. This is just a first initial cut. Now if you were wanting to propagate this, what I would use is I have Clonex growth technology. This stuff works great. It's about 15 bucks off Amazon. I'd recommend it. And all you'd need to do is take a shoot. Probably a bit longer than that, but just strip off. Probably get the new shoots out as well. You'd end up with this. Dip that in the cloning hormone, and then I usually use just 100% perlite, mist it each day, and then put a bag over the top of it to keep the humidity in. And that's probably too much for this Ficus, because they grow like weeds, especially where we are in Australia. Okay, so I've had this tree for about a year, maybe 18 months. And when I first got it, it was very mud-logged. The roots were just sitting in mud. And so the first thing I did was I just repotted it and I gave it a light trim on the canopy. I've given it a heavier trim today, but it still needs a repotting, so let's get into it. So ideally, this is the pot that I want this tree in. So I've got a fair bit of work to do. Now what I'm going to be using is I've got just root pruners, a little root rake, and just some normal pruners. That's most of the debris gone. Now it's just a matter of getting this root ball out. It's in there tight. Now last time I did a little bit of root pruning on it, but not a great deal. Oh man, it's a heavy tree. So you can see on the top here, it's got a really good thick root, which I tried to control last time, and not so much on the back. So that'll probably decide which front I use. I'm leaning more towards something like this, just with this on the front. So let's just slowly start removing the soil, because what I want to do is, now that I've removed all of this canopy, I really want to reduce the roots so that it will eventually fit in this. So we probably have to move, or remove, 4 inches maybe of roots, but this thing bounced back like crazy after repotting it last time. There was not this many roots in it last time I repotted it. There was a few really big thick feeder roots, but look at this here, like, look at all that. That wasn't there. It didn't have roots like that last time. It only had these big thick roots. So, and I've just broken the only leaf off of it, but that's okay. Trust me, these trees, they grow like weeds here. I'll bring you in a little bit closer just while I'm getting some of this stuff out, just so you can kind of see how the root ball is looking and what I'm dealing with. But ideally, because it's spring here at the moment, I'm not too fussed on breaking roots, especially on a tree like this I'm not too fussed on raking roots. I'm more just trying to remove a lot of the dirt so I can see what I'm working with. But you can see the beginnings of the new soil down the bottom here. And when I say this was planted in mud, I mean I could barely get some of the dirt off the root ball. Yeah, this soil down the bottom is so much better. You can even see some old perlite and charcoal in there, compared to the stuff at the top, which is just a bog. So through mostly hard work, I've managed to remove a lot of the dirt. Now there's this, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see they have these big sweet potato-like roots. There's one in here, and most of the time you can just kind of snap them off with a little bit of assistance. I need a bit more leverage. There you go. Look at that. There's another one here. And the reason I want to get rid of these is because when I put it in here, look at how high it sits. So I'm going to take the opportunity to remove it. Look, more. Like, they're so... I'm going to need more. I'm being pretty indiscriminate here with what I'm taking out. Like, I'm only taking out the big ones, just because I don't really want the big ones. You know, the whole idea is that you just want some fine radial rooting. And even this one here that I cut, that's starting to have a little bit of roots off the bottom, so that's good. That's what I wanted. So I'm not going to go crazy on the detail of the roots. More just wanting to get rid of these really big chunky ones. I can't even get it out now. Like, that's how... That's how tough these trees are. Hang on. I have a hand saw. This is what you need. Where am I? I was there. You know what, I'm gonna have to bring in the big guns. I don't recommend doing this in a white shirt, but holy, look at that. That's massive. I can probably do the rest without the chainsaw. And even here, there's a big taproot just growing straight down. I don't want that. Like, I don't want it growing... I mean, it comes from back up here, but what I might do is just kind of cut it off around the soil level. So maybe around there, and let it develop its own further finer root structure. So what do we got? We got Look, even then, that still bears down a fair way. And that will grow roots. So I'm going to snip this one here as well, in the middle. And maybe in the future I'll take off this stump to about here. But until then, I'm just going to get it potted up. Okay, the pot's ready. I just need to add in some wires to tie it in, and then we're good. Now for something like this, it's pretty heavy, and it kind of balances pretty well with its root structure. So I'm probably just going to use one wire. Just figuring out where the hell that wire goes. I'm just going to use the thickest wire I have, which I think is 3mm. So I just want it to go cut it there. So for this first repotting, I'm not going to use bonsai soil. One, because the pot is massive and I actually don't have that much prepared. And two, it's going to need a bit of help, seeing as I've just taken off so many roots and taken off all of its foliage. It did have a piece growing here, but I knocked it off accidentally, so it happens. Now this soil is just previous stuff that I've had and I'm happy to reuse. Whether it's old pre-bonsai material or just plants I've repotted over the years and the soil was still good, it drained well, it held moisture. There are some bits of akadama, some lagerbaroque, perlite, even charcoal in this, and some pine bark. So it's a good mix of organic. I want that sitting up about there, I think. It's got a good mix of organic and inorganic, which should help the tree along its merry way. There are little bits of sphagnum moss in there too. So I'm just making a little mound in the center. Because you know what we're going to do? We're going to grind it down so that it sits nice and square. Now the time is to decide on the front, and I want it to be at the front of the pot. So I think if I that's pretty good. Now how am I going to attach this? Couple of twists. Pull, twist, pull, twist. Really easy. Just helps it coil tightly and hold the tree in. You can cut this bit off if you want. I usually just tuck it in, just out of the way. Now that's going to hold it nice and in place while we get this next bit of soil in. And again, not really working on the finer structure of the roots here, and I'm not really even too concerned about showing the surface roots, because at this point it's more about training the tree into this pot, which is ultimately where I want it. And it's not because this pot is perfect for the tree, it's just because this pot is the only pot I have that is big enough to fit a tree like this. So yeah, bit of a hodgepodge of soils and techniques. This is definitely not ready to go in a show, but that's not the point. The point was just to pot it up. Probably get a bit more soil in there. and then that should about do us.